People have been very generous with gifts with me in these classes. I've been really touched. On Monday, Philip brought me a scallion. Maren sent me a Metro card for 1 day, a 1-day Metro card. And now Jack has hit the jackpot with a cake befitting Chairman Mao. Where we were in the last class, and I really did feel we were reading some quite good stuff. Were you here in the last class, John? Okay, and Maren wasn't here. I don't want to bring that to everybody's notice, but to do notice. And where we left off in the last class, well, the penultimate, that means the next to the last, the penultimate quote was Dostoevsky saying that you can't create a utopia because the greatest of goods for humanity, for individuals, the individuals constituting humanity, the greatest good is the expression of the will, the uncontrolled, untrammeled, unbridled will. And he says that this greatest good, it explodes all blueprints, all logical, reasonable plans or structures or orders of society. And let me just quote just a couple of passages where we left off, and then today we will resume. We're going to have 2 more weeks of class because I want people who are interested enough to get to appreciate the full picture of what Dostoevsky has to say. And I do believe a lot of this will stay with you because it is quite, I would say it's memorable. So at the bottom of page 23, for those of you who don't have a book, just Barry, sit next to Abdullah who has one. I can't. You guys, one of you has? Okay. Okay, we're set. He says at the very bottom, the 3rd line from the bottom, man, whoever he may be, has always and everywhere preferred to act as he chooses and not at all has his reason or personal advantage dictate. Indeed, one can act contrary to one's own best interest, and sometimes it's absolutely imperative to do so. One's own free, independent desire, one's own whims, however unbridled, one's fantasy, sometimes inflamed to the point of madness. All this is precisely that same invariably omitted, most advantageous of advantages, which cannot be accommodated within any classification. Here he means any kind of blueprint for a perfect world, a utopia, and because of which all systems and theories are constantly consigned to the devil. And where on earth did all those sages get the idea that man needs some kind of virtuous, some kind of normal desire? As you recall, he's clearly hearkening back here to More's Utopia, where More said that the pursuit of one's self-interest, one's real self-interest, the person will discover it's in virtuous behavior. The behavior which is virtuous is also to our greatest advantage. And Dostoevsky says, and where on earth did all those sages like Sir Thomas More get the idea that man needs some kind of virtuous, some kind of normal desire? How did they come to imagine that man categorically needs rational, advantageous desire? All man needs is independent volition, will, whatever that independence might cost and wherever it might lead. And last week, the preponderance of the discussion was taken up with the seemingly attractive qualities of this passage. And then I tried to convince people to look more closely at where this is going. All man needs is independent volition, whatever that independence might cost and wherever it may lead. One's own free, independent desire, one's own whims, however unbridled, one's fantasy, sometimes inflamed to the point of madness. It's a nice image, I think, if you're talking about an artist. It's a rather terrifying image if you're talking about a political leader. And it doesn't seem to me that Dostoevsky makes that kind of distinction. By all reckonings, Mr. Hitler had some artistic ability, no point in denying it, and he had a kind of artistic sensibility, but it went in rather terrifying directions when he discovers that his independent volition is the most advantageous of advantages, whatever that independence might cost and wherever it might lead. And there is, I think, something problematic about heaping praise on one's independent desire, one's fantasy, sometimes inflamed to the point of madness. I wonder who would like, before we proceed, I want to ask one question. Who would like to speculate on how would Sir Thomas More respond to this? Dostoevsky says that the most advantageous of advantages is one's unbridled will, sometimes inflamed to the point of madness. And More says our greatest self-interest, if we reflect on it enough, we'll discover that our greatest self-interest, our most advantage of advantages, is to conduct ourselves in accordance with what normally are defined as the virtues. And as you can see, there's a very big difference between More talking about, who recalls what he says our greatest pleasure is? Does anyone remember? Not much different than Plato's Republic, for those who did that in my class. What is our greatest advantage? Excuse me? No, he didn't say that. No. Remember, Moore had a kind of hierarchy of pleasures. Yes. Barry said the pleasures of the mind. Moore is like Plato, that the highest pleasures are those of the contemplative, cultured, refined mind. The person who takes pleasure in art, in music, in literature, and then the abstract sciences as well. For Plato, Moore doesn't talk too much about them. And so before we proceed, I would like to ask the question, because I do believe it is a question worth pondering. Who is right in all this? Is in a desirable world or a utopian world, are the greatest pleasures of the sort that Moore describes in this kind of hierarchy, from the bodily pleasures all the way up to the intellectual contemplative pleasures? Or is Dostoevsky right that the most advantageous of advantages is this unbridled, uncontrolled will, sometimes inflamed to the point of madness, independent volition, where whatever that independence might cost and wherever it might lead? Who has it, in your opinion, right? Which is the more desirable world? I've met in my day both types, and I do think I've just been reading one of the most painful ordeals of a very anguished life, the one I've lived. I've been reading a very large biography of Mao Zedong, because when I was a young man, I was a Maoist with my red book, PLA, People's Liberation Army jacket, Mao cap, and all the rest. And the book has been a horrendous experience for me. I ceased being a Maoist in 1977 when he passed away and everything was quickly reversed. And I never wanted to revisit that chapter in my life. And it was something I was frankly afraid to have to revisit, because you have to confront the fact that you were an imbecile, and that's not a pleasant thing to have to face up to. The only thing worse than an imbecile is a self-righteous imbecile, and I was self-righteous to the point of huge embarrassment in retrospect. And unfortunately, when I read these passages, the one characteristic of Mao was this unbridled will, this unrestrained will, which it's painful for me have to acknowledge, given my past. It was inflamed to the point of madness. Now, Mao, say what you want about him, he also was an artist. He was, by all reckoning of Chinese, he was a great poet. And he did see himself as an artist. And the same thing happened, Hitler, his two main areas of expertise, he wasn't a moron, those who want to say that, they're quite wrong. His main areas of expertise were history and architecture. He knew the arts quite well. He's a failed artist. And you see this, when this artistic temperament, as I think Dostoevsky is describing it here, when that artistic temperament crosses over into politics, a horror show comes out. And I don't think that part of me says, even if what Dostoevsky is saying is right, so what? You're going to have to bridle that volition because, very simply put, it's not all about you. You're going to have to get out of your navel and remember there are other people in this world. It's not just about you. You want your fantasies, to enact your fantasies, sometimes to the point of madness. Well, that's why we have mental asylums and straitjackets. Yeah, because it's not just about you. Okay, let me hear you now. That was by way of introduction. Marin?
I don't think you can ask a question like this one. If the microphone goes around the room, you're going to get 30 different answers. Who is right? It depends on what you have experienced, not what the guy is saying. This one or that one? How do you judge who is right? On what basis?
You judge it the way you judge anything about whether it's right.
So,
it's called using your judgment.
You're going to get 30 different answers.
Let's wait and see.
It doesn't make it right or wrong.
Let's hear your answer. How do you react? How do you react to this passage?
I cannot react because when someone makes a statement and another person makes a different statement, I cannot say this one is better than that one because I don't know what circumstance, who the person is, where he comes from, what is, etc., etc.
But Marin,
yes.
With all due respect, at some point, if we want to make this a better world, we have to have some vision of a desirable future. And then we have to act on that desirable future, on how to achieve it. If you throw up your hands in despair and say 30 people, 30 different visions, then all you're left with is the status quo. You have to at some point come to some sort of, I'm not saying a consensus on every point, but you have to come to some consensus on what do you desire. And then, presumably, I won't be around for it, but there are young people in this room who will be. And then you proceed to try to build a movement and try to build a society based on those values. Now, Dostoevsky says you can't do it. It's not possible, basically for the reason that Marin just said. Because everybody has their own independent will, independent volition, and he says it smashes all systems of classification. You can't do it because we're all different and all we care about is our will, the expression of our independent will. And as somebody said in the Monday class, I guess it was you, it's a vision in which both the necessity and the redemptive aspects of cooperation, collaboration, community, they're all completely absent. Yes, I do like the expression of my will, for sure, but I also derive much satisfaction in working in harmony with others. I don't know on what basis you would necessarily rank independent, unbridled will as the most advantageous of advantages. It's one advantage, I'll grant that. But sitting around in a room like this, cooperatively, harmoniously, exchanging ideas, That's also a form of pleasure. I don't see why, on what basis Dostoevsky has decided that independent will, volition, is the most advantageous of advantages. I think that's completely arbitrary, frankly.
And
But
what you desire, what time, what country, what purpose, what is what you desire? To whom are you talking?
I don't.
So is it for New York City today? What do we desire? Then we might come to some kind of agreement. But if you ask someone in Israel, in Lebanon, in Syria, what do you desire? You're not going to get the same answers.
I'm not so convinced of that, but let's see somebody else. Anyone else like to speak?
I'll just share something small. I really think that they both imply each other. That as much as we can't escape from, the harsh, maybe darker realities that Dostoevsky is bringing forward, we also can't escape from that drive to kind of impose structure and to kind of live up to some higher ideal that we want to see in ourselves. And I kind of come back. I don't remember your name. No,
Ken.
Like last week he mentioned, you were asking something like, how does unbridled will sound to you? And he countered with, how does bridled will sound? And I don't see how you can claim to have a utopia based on bridled will. It's a oxymoron.
Okay, I don't want to pursue it because we discussed this at some length last week. I would just say to you, it's a question of, if I can use the expression, it's a question of loaded language. When you talk about bridled will, of course that has a negative connotation. But if you talk about subordinating your will to trying to live harmoniously with other people, I don't think that's necessarily a negative connotation. If you recognize that we're all in this thing together. Do I want an unbridled will by some billionaire CEO who doesn't care about climate change? I don't think that's a particularly appealing vision. So if you say I don't even want to say a subordinated will, an attempt to live in harmony with others on the basis of the fact that A, there is some pleasure to be derived from that harmonious relationship, listening to other people's thoughts, exchanging ideas, and everything else that comes from it. And B, it's, I think, a necessity for survival, that we need each other, and we have to function and learn to live with each other. And people just can't go off with their independent volition, whatever it might cost and wherever it might lead. As I said, it's a very painful thing for me to have to say, and I still struggle with it, and I will till my dying day. But that sounds an awful lot like Chairman Mao. Independent volition, whatever it might cost and wherever it might lead. He wants to make us, he has a certain vision of China, and he's determined to shape that country in conformity with his vision. And when it didn't fit in, literally, we have to be honest, and it's hard for me to say, tens of millions of people died. Wherever it might lead, whatever it might cost. Well, in the real world, it cost a lot. You know, it's when you start taking these texts quite literally, as I think they're meant to be taken, it's a very problematic thing he's saying here. Okay, two more people, and then we're going to move on because we have to. Go ahead, Efrat. You tell me your name, Sivia. I was going to say Livia. Sivia, yeah.
So I feel like...
Young man, do you mind if you just join us? I always hate two tiers. I will remain a communist to my dying day. No second class aboard this train, no difference in the fare. Okay.
So generally for me, I live my life and I find more harmony and happiness and satisfaction on the intellectual pleasure side. But so it's almost not fair that I would say, yeah, that. I can remember some brother of a friend of mine comes to mind. We had some argument, it was 20 years ago, I can't forget it. And he is this bit of a wild person, and all he wants is to have fun, to go out dancing, drink, eat, sleep around. That's all he wants to do. And he wasn't the sharpest person. And he was very lively and had a lot of, and it's very hard for me to imagine that he would choose that. And it's kind of not fair, because if I imposed Moore's, be like, I don't know if it would work for him, because for me it would work better. Now I also have a little monster that comes out to life that's more Dostoevsky every now and then. I'm saying if I had to choose what's all, I would deal with the monster coming out to life every now and then for the benefits of the intellectual. But if I have to be completely honest, I just can't apply it to I can't say that it's going to make everybody so happy. It's going to take a lot of people outside their nature.
Right. I'm not disputing that. Remember that Moore made that distinction between real pleasures and false pleasures. And he says, in his view, that you can enlighten people to see that the real pleasures are the ones of the mind and harmonious, and the virtues, whatever the virtues are in society, that they would more or less correspond. That too is a postulate. It can't be proven, obviously. It can't be proven. I don't know.
So I feel slightly hypocritical when I say I believe that, I don't know if it's the rational, it's the truth. I always believe that truth, integrity, and morality eventually are the key to all happiness and good life. I don't think a man's like 80, 90, 70 years of life would be enough for me to convince that guy that that's is going to work for him. I just don't see it happening in that timeline.
I think I have a lot of half-formed thoughts here, so I'm not going to share them, but just ask the question. When you introduce people in leadership, isn't that introducing a power dynamic? When we're really asking a question about freedom, like individual freedom and choice? Because I keep looking at this as the individual versus the masses. And there always needs to be these masses to distinguish the individual from. But then you start talking about leadership, and it's like, well, once you start talking about somebody like a dictator or a president people don't like, I mean, you're talking about a certain amount, like an element of coercion perhaps, or an element of, I don't know. I'm just going to hold that thought.
I would have to think about that. I mean, I can't do it unfortunately, I'm not quick enough right now to do that on my feet. The basic objection, or let's say reservation, that Sivia is making is, she's saying that what Dostoevsky's talking about here is something more or less along the lines of what we would call individual freedom, whereas she says, I have conflated or confused that with issues of power, government, leadership, and so forth. I'm not sure. I'm going to just hold back on that and think about it. Excuse me?
Can I still jump in? I wanted just this one.
Yes.
Putting power aside, I think there has to be a balance between the two. I think I want to continue at that point. We need the Picassos to change the art. We need certain people with that independent free will to make a society dynamic and grow. Utopian society is usually static. There's a boring element to it. There's a certain creativity missing. And I can see that the right way of maybe combining something would be finding a version where certain aspects are static for the good for all, but there's an element of society where there isn't the ability where individual can grow. The combination has the better system versus in taking both other sides to the extreme.
I hear what you're saying. I could just put it, it's sort of something to the effect of we'll allow artists and people of that temperament the right to do as they please, but the rest of us have to obey some rules. And I could see that. That's basically how our society in many ways functions. But I don't know if that does or doesn't preclude the possibility of a utopia along the lines that Sir Thomas More describes. But let's now turn where we left off in the last class. The passage which, let's just see, page 16, good. One of the nicest passages in Moore's book, and I wanted Maren to be here for it because it basically articulates what you were saying the whole semester. So page 26. Dostoevsky, yes. (26 to 27). It starts up at the top. Reason is a good thing. This is where we left off. Yeah. You're going to read.
Reason is a good thing.
Yes. Go ahead.
Reason is a good thing. There's no denying it. But reason is only reason and satisfies only man's rational faculty, whereas volition is a manifestation of the whole of life. And by that I mean the whole. The whole of life, together with reason and all the head scratching that goes with it. And even if, in this manifestation, our life frequently turns out to be rubbish, it is still life and not simply the extraction of a square root. As for me, I quite naturally want to live in order to satisfy my whole capacity for living, and not solely to satisfy my capacity for reasoning, which is only 1/20th of my entire capacity for living. What does reason know? Reason only knows what it has managed to discover. The rest, perhaps, it will never discover. That's little comfort, but why not say it outright? Whereas human nature acts as a whole, with everything it comprises, conscious or unconscious, it may talk nonsense, yet it lives.
Okay. Then skip down to, but I repeat. It's just a few lines down.
But I repeat to you for the 100th time that there is one case and only one when man may deliberately and consciously desire something that is downright harmful, even stupid, even extremely stupid, and that is to have the right to desire what is even extremely stupid and not to be duty-bound to desire only what is intelligent. You see, this height of stupidity is your caprice, gentlemen, and in fact might be more advantageous to us than anything else on earth, especially in certain circumstances. But in particular, it can be more advantageous than any other advantage, even when it obviously does us harm, and contradicts the soundest conclusions of our reasoning about advantage. Because at any rate, it preserves what is most precious and most important to us, and that is our personality and our individuality. In fact, some would claim that this is in fact more precious than anything else to man. Of course, volition may coincide with reason if it so wishes, especially if it is not abused but used in moderation. This is useful and occasionally even laudable.
Okay. Reason is a good thing, says Dostoevsky. There's no denying it. But reason is only reason and satisfies only man's rational faculty. Whereas volition, will, is a manifestation of the whole of life. And by that I mean the whole of life, together with reason and all the head scratching that goes with it. And even if in this manifestation our life frequently turns out to be rubbish, I prefer the other translation which says, even if in this manifestation our life frequently turns out to be rubbishy, it is still life and not simply the extraction of a square root. As for me, I quite naturally want to live in order to satisfy my whole capacity for living, and not solely to satisfy my capacity for reasoning, which is, and here's a critical statement by Dostoevsky, our capacity for reasoning is just, says Dostoevsky, 1/20 of our entire capacity for living. Our reasoning faculty, which Western civilization takes such pride in and sees as the redemptive quality of the human species, Dostoevsky deflates that pride and says, as it happens, our reasoning capacity, it comes just down to 1/20 of our whole capacity for living. It's just a pretty trivial part of who we are. And as we discuss this, which we will in a moment, you have to ask yourself that question. Is it true that in the whole of your being, your rational faculty, your reasoning faculty, both the extent to which you make recourse to it in your daily life, and also the extent to which you derive a certain gratification and satisfaction in life, it's in fact the trivialest of parts of who you are. 1/20 of your entire capacity for living is, truth be told, not very much. For Morin, who was arguing this case both in Plato and also when we were doing more, I recall she was making the argument that reason is one part of us, as opposed to our emotional side, our aesthetic side. And she made it sound like reason was maybe 1/2, maybe 1/3. But Dostoevsky goes rather further. He says 1/20, which is in effect to say very little. What does reason know? Reason only knows what it has managed to discover. The rest, perhaps, it will never discover. That's little comfort, but why not say it outright? Whereas human nature acts as a whole, our being is a whole with everything it comprises, conscious or unconscious. It may talk, yet it lives. The human being, as I said, he's writing this at the time when people are discovering the unconscious and all those other aspects of psychology. And now he's saying the human mind, the human psyche, it's so complex. It constitutes the conscious, the unconscious. It may talk nonsense, but that's life. It lives. Reason, he says, does not live. Reason, he says, is just the extraction of a square root. It's a very boring, lifeless formula. But I repeat to you for the 100th time that there is one case and only one when man may deliberately and consciously desire something that is downright harmful, even stupid, even extremely stupid. And that is to have the right to desire what is even extremely stupid. Here he's talking about Frank Sinatra's, I want to do it my way. It may not make sense, it may be dumb, it may be stupid, but it's my way, and I derive a certain gratification from doing it my way, even if it's dumb. To have the right to desire what is even extremely stupid, and not to be duty-bound to desire only what is intelligent. You see, this height of stupidity is your caprice, gentlemen, and in fact might be more advantageous to us than anything else on earth, especially in certain circumstances, but in particular it can be more advantageous than any other advantage, even when it obviously does us harm, and contradicts the soundest conclusions of our reasoning about advantage. Because at any rate, it preserves what is most precious and most important to us, and that is our personality, our individuality. In fact, some would claim that this is in fact more precious than anything else to man. So, there are many claims made here, and where we left off in the last class, and so we took a slight diversion and some repetition. Where we left off in the last class, I don't want to put him on the spot, but I will nonetheless, because Abdullah to my right, he was a student of mine many eons ago at Brooklyn College, and this is Abdullah. And then he went on to go to the Columbia University School of Journalism. And then he went to Egypt to work. He's Egyptian by birth, by family. And we stayed in contact over the years. I had him as a student from 1988 to 92. So we're talking about a considerable period of time. And we communicated, and it was a very rough period. I mean, I remember he told me there were periods he went a couple of days without eating. He was, what Dostoevsky is talking about here is the starving artist. I mean, that's obviously what he's referring to. You want to pursue your dream, but that dream can be very rubbishy. Very rubbishy. He's now, trying to free you of illusions about this pursuing your dream. It can turn out to be real crap. How many times do you see in the subway platform really talented musicians? Especially I've seen the ones from China. They come out and they perform, and you're competing against the rumble of the A, C, and E train. That's not Carnegie Hall. That's rubbishy. It is so rubbishy. You're competing against the rumble of the subways and the rats on the track. That's rubbishy. But Dostoevsky says, it may be rubbishy, but still it lives. It's still life, and not simply the extraction of a square root. And I remember many times thinking, because I knew Abdullah respected my judgment, to tell him, Abdullah, I think it's time to say, forget it, just get a regular job and live a normal life. I know it's just the extraction of a square root, I know that, but this may sound, Dostoevsky is kind of, yet it lives. Does it live, Abdullah?
Do you want to respond?
Do you, when you look back, because now he's come home only very recently, only this last year, when you look back, do you regret your decisions or not? Or you agree with Dostoevsky, it might be rubbishy, but it lives?
Yeah, it is rubbishy, and it does live. And I think in some way your experiences kind of shape who you are later on, so it's hard to kind of subtract them from your life and to kind of live it differently. Also, because there's no rewind button in life, so you don't have that.
If there were a rewind button, Dostoevsky says it's rubbishy, but it lives. If you had the choice of a rewind button, would you take the extraction of a square root?
Maybe not.
Uh-huh. Anybody else at that point in life or has had that experience of deciding to go for their dream, but it turns out quite rubbishy?
I actually have an observation about the opposite, whether somebody did experience the square root of life and
Did
comes
experience
up the square root life
Uh-huh.
and decides that, I've spent, 20, 30, 40 years in this soul-sucking machine.
You called
of
it the
a
rat
life.
race in my
Yes.
day.
And if they had that rewind button, would they have pushed it? to
Okay, very
choose
good
the
question.
rubbishy life?
Very good question. There's two ways to look at it. Those who took the route of rubbishy, and then there are those who took the route of the extraction of the square root and who look back and wonder, what if I had gone and done what I wanted to do with my life?
Can I respond?
Yeah, I think this, yes, you wanted
Well,
to say
maybe
something.
just by a raise of hand, who would have pushed the rewind button? How's that? Would that be fair?
How many would have pushed the rewind button?
Try the binary.
Well, I don't agree with that. I do think it's binary because you have to be realistic. I tell students, I used to tell students when I was still a professor, you do have to make choices in life. You come to a crossroads and you have to decide which path you're going to take because life often is binary. You can't, as the expression has it, you can't have your cake and eat it. Sometimes you do have to choose to conform that extraction of the square root or decide I'm not conforming, and then you face the same prospect as Abdullah did. It wasn't because he didn't want to have a little of both. He discovered you couldn't. Do you think those people on the subway want to perform there on the platform? Some, but I've seen some guys, who you could see were in the Philharmonic in China. I mean, first-class violinists, and no, they don't want to be there. It's painfully clear.
We all live a life of compromise.
There's a life of compromise, and there's a life of not being able to eat for a couple of days. I'll just say briefly, because I've mentioned it before, and I want to hear from you, and I'll just say, I chose the Dostoevsky. I'm not going to live the extraction of a square root. I decided that when I was young, during the 60s and 70s, the counterculture era. I am not going to be the little boxes on the hilltop, boxes. I must not. I had a minimum salary, less than minimum, sub-minimum. It was rubbishy, and there's no getting around it. You don't know rubbishy until you're sleeping at night and you feel something in your mouth and it's cockroaches. And then they're going in your ear and in your nose. Yes, it was disgusting. And it wasn't because I wasn't clean. I keep a clean, as people who come into my place, and there are many, I keep a spotless place. the cockroaches in your ears, in your mouth, in your nose, and everywhere else. The mice going into your dishes. The mice are so aggressive, they would go in, I'm not kidding, I can't make these things up. They would lift the lid off the pots and go in, yes. Yes, I don't know, some of you must have experienced that. They go into your pots, the mice. What?
Do they have opposable thumbs?
Do they what?
Have opposable thumbs to lift the...
I don't know how they did it. Don't be a wise guy. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. Then you become the expert, the mice traps, and what do you want to get? The sound, the traps that break their eardrums, the glue traps, and when you get the glue trap, because they're, oh yeah, it was ghastly. And then living in Washington Heights, salsa, merengue, 24/7, 365, for 8 years. For 8 years. And then the cars which are triple parked, they say, what's the big deal? Cars are triple parked. Oh, really? I'll tell you what the big deal is. Because at 6 a.m., the car which is closest to the pavement wants to get out. For hours. Because these people take their time to come downstairs. Rubbishy. I can tell you stories. I was already teaching as an adjunct, but I was never able to get a normal job. I was once using the Xerox machine in my department at Hunter College. A professor about 5'2", what are you using the Xerox machine? I said, I work here, I'm an adjunct. She called security on me. Can you imagine? I swear. Called security on me. Can you imagine? It's funny. I could tell you stories, rubbishy, and then the supreme rubbishy, 10 years unemployed. Does that beat the extraction of a square root? Answer, of course. I don't need a rewind button. I wouldn't do anything differently. Of course you do little things differently. Sometimes I would have shut up maybe. But no, even though there's a lot of Dostoevsky I don't like, I agree. It's rubbishy, but it lives.
I don't know if this is working or. Okay. Yeah, I'm coming in the middle of Notes from Underground, and I haven't read Moore's Utopia, or I haven't read this in several years. But I'm wondering, are we only asking this question in terms of utopian circumstances? I mean, because I do think that absolutely one's personality and individuality is the most precious thing known to man, and we realize that when they're threatened, and in a dystopian environment in which they're like in Maoist China, so I'm reading this, and I'm hearing your story, Abdullah, and your story, and thinking that's so glorious, though, that you had the option to choose what to do with your life, and how to spend your time, and how to make your money, and the option to make money. And I'm thinking, the underground man is a kind of peculiar source to get our notes on Utopia from. He clearly has his own feelings about society. But the most important thing, I think, about humanity, especially in society, is personal life and maintaining personal life. And I think that this is something to really keep in mind now. The most precious thing about humankind is personality, is individuality. And if that means, and we have to go we have to do whatever we can to preserve that, or
I was-
else we will be like reduced to a square root, to an extraction of a square root. If that means journaling all the time, you know, to remember what's going on now, to remember our lives as they are now, to remember the things that we feel and think and want, then like do that. If it's attending these lectures at public institutions that support us as citizens and as individuals, then we have to do that. But absolutely, I think on this particular point, the underground man is right. I think that when he talks about volition above all else, he is kind of decontextualizing the individual, and you know, if we put pleasure against advantage, those are completely different things. So I agree with you on that. Yeah, you can't really compare them, but yes, and I just appreciate your story a lot, and I think that's something we have to keep in mind at this.
It was a
present
very
moment.
impressive story. You know, I'm not here to flatter Abdullah, but that took, my hat was off to him, but I felt the responsible thing was to say, end it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the alternative was the extraction of a square root.
Well, is that what you said, or did you?
I don't remember
Or did you restrain yourself?
if I ever actually said that to you. I think I hinted it, but I didn't want to say it because I felt life is short. If that's his dream, let him try to realize it, you know. But I hear what you're saying, and you sound very much like a child of the 60s, even though you didn't grow up in the 60s. But as I said with Sylvia, where I not disagree, it's one thing to say it when you're young and then to start living those choices, and they are pretty brutal.
Mm-hmm.
They are pretty brutal. He was hungry. I would have to say a large part of my life I was humiliated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They are pretty brutal.
It can get more brutal. I mean, if we're talking about Maoists and what he was doing, I mean, if you want to stick to your individuality, you could be dragged away, had the violin smashed, and then you're gone forever. Yeah, so. And that has happened to my family in the past. So it could be very brutal.
I'm
so
painfully aware of that. As I said, it's been a very rough time reading through that period again and seeing the mistakes I made. I heard you say your grandfather, well, there are probably about 40 million grandfathers who have that story. Anyone else want to comment? Carrington?
I had an interesting experience in my 20s where I was living in Denmark, and it was sort of like Utopia. I was actually reading Notes from the Underground, and I was married to someone. I ended up leaving him in this part because of the 2 + 2 is 4 aspect of his being, and maybe the 2 + 2 is 5 aspect to mine. But,
Wait, say that again. Who was 2 + 2 equals?
He was 2 + 2 is 4, and I was more 2 + 2 is 5, and like it wasn't the probably most intelligent thing to do. And I went back to New York and lived in my loft to no heat for the next 10 years. But it was living, and I felt like when I was there, everything was utopic, and I felt like I would know what I'd be doing 30 years from now if I didn't. And it didn't feel like living.
So what finally happened after 10 years in a loft without heat?
I got evicted and I moved to Brooklyn.
You what?
I got evicted and I moved to Brooklyn. Where there's heat.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's heat. It was nice, actually. I got a settlement, so I was able to set myself up in Brooklyn okay. But, I mean, it was rough. Winters in New York without heat. Tricky, but I didn't really look back.
What about other people? Anybody choose the... I did want to hear from Shannon, because I know Shannon did choose not to go the conventional route, even though I can attest, because he was also my student. He's a very smart guy. His mother said, I met his mother on Easter Sunday, and she was talking about each of her children, and she said about Shannon, I think he swallowed a dictionary. 'Cause he definitely has what's called the gift for gab, and he's just a wonderful, lively writer. So it's quite clear that he could have gone in other directions, though to be perfectly honest, he lives in a very beautiful house in the Prospect Park area. So rubbishy it's not, and rodents you haven't had to contend with, I don't think. Go ahead.
Thank you. I've had great teachers, so it's been a good journey. A few things to comment about. I think that when anybody resolves within themselves to become the extraction of a square root, you only become part of an equation of somebody else's stupidity. Because when I speak to young people, my nephews especially, about higher education, what to study, I always encourage people to study their passions. Because don't think of what's going to make you money, don't think of what's going to get you a good job. Study your passions, because there are as many unique perspectives in the world as there are people. And if you study your passions, you will find a way to make your passions into a program that works for you. And you will discover how to build a better mousetrap based on your perspective. You will bring what your stupidity is to the marketplace and accentuate that with your perspective. That gives you a leg up on anybody else, because no one else can see it the way you see it, or do it exactly how you can, because no one else has had your experience.
I totally agree with that. That's what we talked about on Monday in the.
Like a 2 + 2 is 4.
Yeah, but the thing about the thing, Shan, I'll go with you all the distance until sometimes you bring your individuality to the marketplace, and guess what? There are no buyers. There are no buyers. You are a very good violinist. Well, you know, orchestras have a finite number of violinists, and they need 10, and you are 11.
I would agree with that.
And following your passion now, Shannon, it's not a death certificate, but it is an unemployment certificate. We have to be honest about that. It's very hard, unless you want to live a rubbishy life, it's very hard now to follow your passion.
I think that's because people follow their passion but still try to put it into conventional pathways. It's really forging your own path based on your passions. So there's not a career course that you follow. You study your passions and you forge your own path.
One of the things I like about Dostoevsky in this particular passage, he's honest. It turns out often rubbishy. And we have to be frank about that. He says it lives, but it turns out rubbishy. You know? I wish.
Depends on what your goal is. Then, if your goal is the money, but not the passion, then yes, you could strain it through. The filter is.
Yes. First of all, you do need money.
Well, no, I did not say. I didn't say that. I mean, I
you do need money.
Better places. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you know, real estate agent too.
I find in the marketplace, just my experience, even I do some art and music, and I find that anything you really want to express, when it comes to a marketplace, the marketplace is against individuality. There's a system, you have to fit into a box. It has to be a specific box. Independent thinking doesn't work. And you right away, certain things I do, and I realize whenever it gets in production, and the more successful it is, the more painful it is, because the success of it is not what you want. And you gotta make a choice. You want you, then you can never produce anything. You want what the market wants, you can compromise. And I just want to give a personal experience about health. I find that also in the healthcare system. I had a situation, a family, where a child needed a serious operation. And it was a very, very rare thing. But it's like a particular heart issue where there is many rare things, but this was rare of the rare. And one of the big institutions wanted to make a surgery, and the surgery would have been a disaster. And it were top surgeons. And the reason was also because everybody running in a system wanted to put it into a box. You find the closest box, and you want to follow a particular path. People are used to, in commercial marketplace, even when it comes to health, everything is a box. So sometimes the closest box may be a big disaster. Happens to be ended up going to Boston with a particular unique doctor, and that things out of the box, that in a certain sense is fortunate to be in an institution where he could express his own individuality in health and change the course and save the life. The point what I bring out is that marketplace in every aspect, even when it's like health, where you have to have a passion, where it's life and people care, and that's our motto, and supposedly it's supposed to be quote unquote ingrained in the system that you care, everybody gets health care. It's all full of boxes. And therefore I in a certain sense disagree with that aspect. I agree with the aspect that if you want to find something, you're going to feel much better about yourself if you do when you compromise on your passion, so to speak, versus doing 2 + 2 = 4, where people are doing that kind of elevator job where you don't even have any passion at all. But this is, both are 2 + 2 = 4 to me. The real person, which I think Dostoevsky is talking about, a person that doesn't care about any boxes. A person that really goes out and does not compromise an iota. And that not compromising an iota, that's the most important point, I think. I'm not sure.
I want to just hear from some other people first. Okay, Anne, who is our resident conformist.
Your life is in danger. No more brownies for you.
That I find unacceptable.
Well, Phil has the recipe next, and we can have the bake off.
Bacon for him. He doesn't like my farm. He's not like my cookies.
The onion. Going back to pressing the reset button, that actually makes me very sad.
Going back to what?
Pressing the reset button, the question that you asked about 10 minutes ago. That actually makes me very sad when people raise their hands. It means that they're a bit dissatisfied with the way they live their lives. I guess we all can think of things that, well, I wish I had done things differently. But it brings to mind that very beautiful poem by T.S. Eliot, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and that one line that really, really breaks my heart. I hear the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. And to me, this is, conforming, following, living in the little boxes, if you will. And Shannon, I fully agree with what you're saying. Follow your passion. That's what I tell kids. Follow your passion. Do it.
I'm not saying don't follow your passions. I'm saying be realistic about what happens when you do. Maybe it lives, but it is awful rubbishy. And nobody's going to convince me otherwise. The stories I can tell.
I was one of who raised my hand for the reset button. I mean, I was one of those who raised my hand for the reset button. And, we each have individual experiences. I mean, there is no comparison. If you compare them, you will feel a sense of inferiority or superiority. But I came of age during the Grenada Revolution.
During what?
The Grenada Revolution.
That was another one of my mishaps.
Yeah.
Maurice Bishop, the New Jewel movement.
I was a student in Cyprus then. And then my parents, they sacrificed everything because I was the one in the family to take it to higher heights.
You were what?
I was the one in the family to take their dreams to the highest height. Okay? They were only able to pay for me to go to the London School of Economics for 1 year in public relations. When I came here to visit my sister, they looked at my passport and they said, Grenada Revolution. They did a background check on me. And they came to me because back then in Cyprus, in Europe, I learned 4 other languages besides English. So they wanted me to do things. One governmental agency, I refused. Because I came of age during the Grenada Revolution.
You're going too fast here.
They asked of me some things, and I refused. And I paid a price. I'm not going to say.
No, when you say they, you're referring to the American government?
Yeah. And I paid for it. I paid most dearly. My parents died calling out for me, and I wasn't able to go. And now I have my son. And when we talk, I tell him, you owe me. And you owe me big time. I've put my hopes and dreams on the line so I want no excuses. I said, I have no home to go home to. The line that you quoted, I hear the mermaids. The sea mean a lot to me. My father is a fisherman. The sea gives me hope. I'm an island girl. Everywhere I go to water, they call to me. But during those years, the shorelines of my homeland keep receding from me. And even though I'm here in America, I still feel that sense of loss. I feel like that motherless child Ella Fitzgerald sings about.
I'm a little confused about one thing. I mean, everyone can ask. I'm just trying to get clarity. You said you would set the reset button. Does that mean you would have cooperated?
I would have made different choices then.
I don't think you would have.
I would have.
Well, that's treason to your people.
I would have.
You would?
I would have. It's not treason to my people because my father, his mother was a Carib. Those were the people Columbus met. And he paid a price also. So it seemed like a generation, it's required of, it's not even required. It's not even a choice. You either leap to your death or you make peace with it. And it's hard.
Well, I'm going to be very careful now what I write to you in my emails.
Wow.
Anyone else? Anyone at a crossroads? Having to decide whether I'm going to live a life rubbishy but it lives, or be an extraction of a square root. If ever in my life I ever saw an extraction of a square root, it's John.
Well, you might want to go first.
That's very funny. Yeah, I do. I'm a little bit of a mixture of both. I grew up drawing, so I was encouraged to pursue that a little bit, and then I got into music once I moved to New York. Or no, actually before, but started playing in bands and stuff here. And then at the same time, I was good at math, and I was kind of like, encouraged and to do that as well. And so, but I kind of fell out of math because I looked around my peers and all the 2 and 2 makes 4 crowd. People who like, I don't know if I shared this story already, but people who would like tell me they couldn't wait to work for Raytheon to make war machines, to put their mathematics to the ultimate use, and so, but also I agree with that whole box thing with the creativity thing. Like I remember I grew up reading comics and, I toyed around with the idea, just imagined, I wonder what it would be like to draw comics. And it's just more, as I read about the industry, it just seemed like an awful place to be. And I didn't want to be a part of it. And then also with education, I feel like I was always passionate about learning, and then I would think about, I want to be like a math teacher or something, and then I would hear horror stories from my teachers saying like, no, you don't want to be a high school math teacher. Like, I would have this one teacher who would just always constantly complain about the administration and the stuff that they were forced to do. So I don't know, that's just a little storytelling. But I think one thing I wanted to comment on was this, like, I feel like Dostoevsky's half right, half wrong. I feel like there's this weird, like, the idea that's good, but then it's couched in this liberal terminology, which I have, like, a huge problem with. Like, I really, like, wince at the idea of personality and individuality being, like, the greatest thing since sliced bread.
That's what she said.
Yeah. I mean, just maybe it's just a loaded term now, but I feel, when it's put in opposition to, the social, and then also just how it's used today, it's co-option for like the purposes of, who really loves individuality is like all these like tech groups. I was thinking like Silicon Valley, always like, oh, we want like our Google like employees to be like so creative, and it's always, again, it's like for that Raytheon purpose. It's like, oh yeah, just like we want you to like come up with like the brand new hottest thing, that's outside the box, and then we can make like tons of money on it, right? And also it's remarketed back to ourselves. You were talking about, the branding on clothes too, the individuality, like expressing that through capitalism.
You're just talking about capitalism, though you're not really talking about individuality and personality. You're talking about empty rhetoric.
Well, he was saying that I want to be fair to him and fair to you. What he was saying is that the language of individuality in our society has come to be suspect because it's about trying to encourage people to be individual, not for the sake of individuality, but for the sake of making more money, coming up with a new app. By the way, I don't know what an app is, but people are always telling me about this thing called app. So that's what he was saying. He says, I have trouble when I hear that language because that language has been effectively co-opted by our system, and he doesn't like where it's gone. I want to just, because of purposes of time and because Jack, where is Jack? Jack, he brought a cake, which he said each of you can get one small slice. So I want to have a chance for that. But I wanted to just look at one other of his propositions here, and from people who haven't yet talked. Namely, we'll start with Barry. And Barry, Dostoevsky says that our reasoning faculty is just one tiny part of who we are. Just 1/20th part of who we are. Whereas will, volition, that expresses the whole of our being, of which a tiny part is our thinking. So, the famous quote always attributed correctly to Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And Dostoevsky is saying, that's way, way, way exaggerated. I think, therefore, that's 1/20th of who I am. How do you feel about that? As you look at yourself, would you say your thoughts are a critical part of who you are or a trivial part of who you are?
Good question. We need time to think about it. You have answered the question.
I set you up for that.
I think that answers the question.
Say that again?
I think that answers the question.
Meaning?
That reasoning and thinking is a critical part of my being.
Barry?
I don't know. I think as much as someone could orchestrate their life and like people like to say, oh, you create your own life and all that, you can't really think through how things should be. Life sort of takes you by the bull, and sort of along the way you're trying to make some sort of sense of things, and you try to think of how things should be. If that.
I want to there's a distinction to be made between the fact that even as you think things through, life has many curveballs coming at you, so you can't really plot your life according to your thoughts. But Dostoevsky is saying something a little bit different here, basically what Maren was arguing for 2 semesters now. He's saying that a large part of our being, in fact, in his view, the preponderance of our being, is not our rational thoughts.
We're made up of so much more.
So much more. And he does say, I think, because I've been thinking about this lately, he says there's your conscious and your unconscious, and as you get older, at least my experience has been, others may be different, you discover the extent to which you were the victim of or controlled by all sorts of non-rational thoughts buried inside you, and that your reasoning didn't play such a big role in the choices that you made in life as you think they did. Didn't play as big a role as you think they did, and you start realizing, well, I really did that because of that, and the reason I'm doing this is because of that, and it wasn't really because I made a conscious choice to do it. It's because of all sorts of things in my personality, my psyche, of which maybe my reason didn't play all that significant a role in shaping who I am as a human being.
Doesn't that completely absolve everyone from everything?
I don't know if it absolves, but I don't know. I don't know if it's true. Let's just go around. You didn't speak. You were next.
Back to something else. I wonder whether Robert Oppenheimer would have pressed the rewind button.
What?
I wonder whether Robert Oppenheimer would have pressed the rewind button. He probably, well, one doesn't know, one will never know, but...
He's considered the father of the atomic bomb. And he
was
seems
really
like
broken.
He had second thoughts about releasing that little genie from the bottle.
But what you were, one's own, how much is rational thought? I think it depends on, for me anyhow, what point of life one is in. My father, when I graduated, wanted me to be a policewoman. And wasn't for me. I knew there was a world out there. And so I started working for an organization. One didn't know what future there was in it, but one thing did lead to another. But one did have to spend a lot of time. It wasn't the highest level of thinking, but it was arranging programs for leaders and specialists from around the world, mainly Middle East, Africa. And so one had to be on one's toes and arrange good programs, and so I spent quite a bit of time thinking about what I was doing. And one thing led to another. That was, I worked, 40 years now, I'm retired. All I have to think about now is Palestine. And that takes up a lot of thought these days. But I think that when one is working, I don't know where the 20% came from that Dostoevsky.
It's not less than 20, it's just 5%, 1/20th.
Or 1/20th, yeah, yes. All right, 1/20th.
So 95% of who you are is not your rational thoughts.
Yeah, but at a certain time in life, I think one is spending perhaps even more time than that, in more than one, I keep calling it 1/20th of one's thinking and one's being is on what one is doing if one wants to do the best job possible.
Okay, I mean, that's an argument. If we take Dostoevsky at his word, then, your name just slipped my mind? Barbara says, that doesn't really jibe with my experience in life. Most people at their job, a large part of their life is thinking rationally, is acting rationally. Otherwise, you're not going to survive very long at your job. The idea that it's only 1/20th of who you are, well, you could say, he says He says, my capacity for reasoning, which is only 1/20th of my entire capacity for living. And I think you can make a distinction between doing a 9-to-5 job where you have to think on your feet, but you're not really living.
Barbara did not have a 9-to-5 job. She worked in Ethiopia, she worked in Jerusalem. She made it sound like she lived in this little cubicle. She had a fascinating job.
What I'm saying is for everyone, this is whatever it happens to be, you're spending your time. Playing your time. As you want.
The only one who can resolve that is Oprah, and she's not here. Philip?
So since Simon watched all the videos, I feel I've had my fair share of screen time over the last 6 weeks, and I want to verbally appreciate Jack for bringing that nice gift. And I'd like us, like Monday, you promised Terry's husband a moment and to get back to him, but we never did 20 minutes later. So I don't want to neglect the cake.
I didn't follow that. It ended with cake. That sounded good. What time is it now?
We're good.
Okay, let's get the cake. Wait. Unless somebody has some. Hold it. Wait.
That's not too bad.
Oh wait, no, it's not.
They're gonna push it
quarter
right
to.
till 9 o'clock.
8:35. Oh, the deception, the betrayal, the treason. Okay, go ahead, Ken.
Let me just say, the reason why I've been giggling when I heard some of the comments is not necessarily that I found them funny. It's just that before the group got here, Marin and I were having a friendly argument. We got here early about our favorite subject, which is Edward Said. And I was trying to come up with an argument to defend Western civilization and the greatness thereof, which I, of course, believe in. I said the greatness of Western civilization and America in particular. The greatness of the promise of America is that you have the right to waste your life however you want to. And I think that would be my argument against Said and anybody else who disputed that. The reason why I've always been unhappy is because I never felt like although I've certainly wasted my life plenty, I've not been able to waste it in the way that I wanted to. You know, Cleon Skousen, the economist, he said, you have 3 fundamental rights in society: the right to try, the right to succeed, and the right to fail. The most important of those might be the right to fail. The right to fail is a very important way. I think Dostoevsky, in a much more, not a direct way, is making that point, that the right to fail is a very important part of our humanity.
Wait, how have you not been able to fail in the way that you wanted? Aren't you in America? It seems contradictory.
My life is crazy, but that's what you're supposed to do in America. You fail the way you want to fail.
No, but you're saying you failed not the way you wanted.
Right.
You know,
I didn't say I didn't fail. I just didn't
I
fail the way
turned to
I want
Abdullah to look at his face, and you know, I just find I have a little trouble with that. You do have the right to fail, but I didn't want to fail. I felt I was a good teacher. My students seemed to think I was a good teacher, and I was denied the right to teach. And should I derive some consolation from the fact that I had the right to fail? And that's what makes our society great? I just find that so convoluted as to leave me, which is very rare, leave me speechless. I don't understand that. I think I should have the right to succeed. But I wasn't given that right. I'm very confused. I think Abdullah wanted to be a journalist, and he had the talent to be one. And I don't think there's any great redeeming virtue in the fact that you failed. You won't do the rewind button. I wouldn't do it differently, but I certainly would like to have been able to teach.
I'm not sure it's about personality and individuality. When he says when he says that art is an intellectual activity, and he says that reason is only 20%.
5%, 1/20th.
Okay, it's another of his contradictions. What really happens, it's not personality as a static thing that continues throughout your life. It is the fact that the art or life brings together everything that is in us, the heart, the senses, the mind, and when we become one, then there is a dynamic situation within us that pushes us to do things that are not passive. It's not just individuality and personality. It is this awakening to something, this novelty, what happens within us. Looking at the work of art is not a question of intellect. Your senses are part of it, your heart is part of it if you move, etc. So it's much more than individuality and personality. You wanted to talk.
I'm still caught up with a lot of equivocation and, what it is to be sort of outside the norm, whether it's art or if you're being a writer or you're being, who's suffering more kind of came up a little bit. But to me, the question that Dostoevsky's asking really is, to what extent are you going to risk your creature comforts to be a dissident, to go against what everyone else is thinking? And I tied into what you were saying is sort of like the extent whether you have choice. Like that's the beauty of living in a country where you can say your piece and say your truth. The question is, what risks are you willing to take for that truth? And that's the thing about, and I think with journalism and book writing and idea conveying or whatever, it's a pursuit in some ways of the most rational. But to me, he's a contrarian. The whole thing is he's going to separate himself from society at all costs. The question is, to what extent are you willing to suffer for your truth? That's sort of how I sort of attach all the ideas together.
I'm going to take. Okay, wait. We'll hear that when enough. What does your clock say? 8:40. We have 3 minutes. I want to just Hey, 3 minutes is time. Try to hold your breath underwater for 3 minutes. It's not. Malachi. What do you say to what he says? Your being is only 5% of your being is your mind. The rest is a hodgepodge. That true? Or the other issue he raises. I'm sure you know a lot of people who ended up lives which were rubbishy.
I think that's how you, it's just how you view what rubbish really is. I think it's more personal than anything. In my short 21 years of life, I've been the square root, and I've been the other thing that everybody was talking about.
Bring the microphone a little closer.
I'm sorry. With my passion of sports and stuff, I was, like I talked about with the one class, pursuing that, and then I didn't do the things that I should have in order to put myself in those positions. So then I chose the other path to go to school and I guess be the square root and pursued chemical engineering. And I was doing good in class and stuff. But I was just unhappy. I just didn't really care for anything really. So then I wasn't able to go back for the second semester because I couldn't really pay for it. I mean, money was tight. But I felt a sense of kind of relief that I couldn't pay for it because it was like I was kind of free in a way. So now I'm here and I'm pursuing my dreams in my own ways, and I feel like to address the whole reset button, I feel like I would press the reset button only to go back and do other things differently for my first goal, I guess. So I would be able to put myself in a better position.
You're way too young for the reset button.
No, I'm not.
You didn't even get set. Forget the reset.
I feel like I've been alive for a very long time.
But one thing he said earlier, it did make me think, and I'll just end it on that if you'll allow me. Yes, it was rubbishy, but extraction of a square root, in my opinion, is even more rubbishy. So if I had to choose between rubbishies, I would take the cockroaches to spouting the lies. That's the choice. Okay, now Jack, who didn't say anything in this class, though gifted us with a 7-layer ice cream cake with it's my fancy inflamed to madness. Ice cream, chocolate mousse. Go ahead. Break it out.